Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento. And if you've ever sat there thinking, how the heck am I supposed to hone in on the business that I'm meant to start? I have too many passions. I have too many disciplines that I like to operate in. Well, then you're going to love today's guest and today's entrepreneur, because this is someone who not only is incredibly brilliant at all the things that she does, but I love the way that she sees the world and apply those lessons, those skills, those passions, those disciplines to finding solutions for others. So let me introduce you to today's guest. Her name is Shefali Mehta. Shefali is an economist and statistician who loves working with individuals and organizations to increase their impact. While economics and statistics form the foundation for everything she does, the work that she loves to undertake cannot be easily categorized. A lot of you will probably perk your ears up at that. You don't feel like you fit into one of those boxes that everyone tries to pigeonhole all of us into. Her work instead cuts across disciplines, focusing more on the problem to solve or the objective to attain. She supports her personal mission through several interconnected activities, from consulting and advising to researching, teaching, implementing and coaching, advocating and volunteering. In 2017, she founded her own company, Open Rivers Consulting Associates, which is a science and technology and management consulting firm that builds upon their clients' strengths to develop and implement strategy. Their work delivers holistic, impactful strategy guided by 5 core principles: innovation, compassion, decision-making driven by data and science, diversity of perspectives, and the prioritization of environment. We are all going to not only learn so much from Shefali here today, but she's really going to invite us to change the way that we see the world, that we see our businesses, the way that we see our problems, and for sure the way that we find solutions. I'm excited about this one. I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Shefali Mehta. All right, Shefali, I am so very excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, Brian. Thank you.
Heck yeah. So listeners won't know how much you and I just geeked out about economics before we hit record, but I'm sure that's a perfect segue for you to take us beyond the bio. Who's Shefali? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Absolutely. Well, I grew up in New England, in Connecticut, and I just remember from the earliest age, I loved learning. I love things. And, I think when it came time to go, what do I want to study? I had a hard time figuring, I was focused on neuroscience. I loved economics. I loved comp sci. And I remember my first week at NYU, they gave me the course. I had signed up for neuroscience undergrad. And I looked and I realized I had classes on Friday and all the other students don't. Only the science kids did. And I want to say that my laziness helped me prioritize. I realized I didn't want to do any science courses, so I suddenly switched my major to economics and computer science, which is funny because I went to NYU to study neuroscience. But I'm so grateful I did that, because economics gave me the breadth to go and say I don't actually have to limit myself. It's like a tool that can be applied to anything. And then I started to bring in statistics. I did a minor in history. I was doing my master's in public policy. It was just great to be at this big university where I could just study. And then I'm outside in the community, and I just kept bringing more in and more in, watching people protesting sweatshops and unfair labor conditions, to helping young kids, young women, young girls who are in our community to get access to higher ed and everything. And that really just kind of drove me further into this. We don't have to limit ourselves. We get to explore and be, and everything we learn just becomes that much more impactful to the next step that we go after.
Yeah, I love that overview, Shefali, because of course, you know how much you and I share in common about our love for economics. And when I hear you bring up laziness, I always felt that way as a student too, where I was like, some people might label it lazy, but I'm going to find the best way to do it. And that's why I've always loved that quote of efficiency is intelligent laziness. So I love the way that has guided you into finding these solutions, because I think we need an element of that. Talk to us about economics as the foundation, because I think for both you and I, it's probably a misunderstood part about our backgrounds where people say, why economics? What the heck's that going to do for you? Neither of us work a traditional job in economics. We don't work at the Federal Reserve. Why is that such a good foundation to launch from?
Absolutely. And I think it's one of the, I love that you have that background. And I think I've seen this in others is when we really connect with the field of economics, really what it is at the heart is it's understanding how to study the systems we created. Our economy is created by humans, the way we interact, how we allocate resources, how we make decisions. So it's really around the fundamentals of understanding how we interact with one another, how we interact with the environment, with just taking care of one another, really at the heart of it. And it's also founded on the basis of like math. So you have mathematics that is really helping to understand and like establish the theory and really these first principles. And so once you kind of get comfortable with looking at, think of it as a systems lens, like looking at it from that way, it really, I think it just unleashes a lot of power because there's no restriction. You can say, okay, well, what do I understand? Like prior to us recording, we were talking about just basic spending, what happens in our economy when we have a contraction in whether it's government spending, consumer spending, business spending. And they're just basic principles and understanding of how our economy works. So then we can go and look at whether it's a micro situation in our own personal lives, in our own businesses, and say what could be happening to some of the macro issues around what's happening to our society. In my case, it's how do I work with my clients and my collaborators to advise them in terms of where they should focus, where the risk is. And so economics, to me, is this incredible tool that can be applied. So you don't have to have, I think it's a lot of, there's a misnomer. People think that there's this or belief that to be an economist, you need to be at a university or you're working in like the financial markets. Actually, the economists that I love working with and the path I took is you take it on the road. You know, it's really applied. It's made to be applied. And so I call myself an applied economist. I've been applying it for over 20 years in everything that I do. And every subsequent, like I would say, it's almost like active research. Everything that I look at, it feeds into I do a lot of work on how people do decision making. And that was actually the focus of my dissertation. And so it's been 20 years now, almost since I defended. And I look at every single thing I've done has only just furthered my understanding of decision making under uncertainty and really strengthened that basis that I had formed in economics.
Yeah, Shefali, I guess I'll out myself a little bit here on the air because in over 1,100 episodes, I've actually never talked about the defining moment that changed the entire course of what I majored in college and how I approach business and how I find solutions. But you just called out those three words. And so I'll take you all the way back 21 years to when I was 15 years old, sitting in a high school classroom. And my economics teacher at the time said, raise your hand if you think you know what economics is. And you've hit the nail on the head. Obviously, you live in this world. I was such an excited young student. I was like, it's the study of the stock market. We figure out how to make money. And that's what everybody thinks about it. But he immediately shut me down. He said, no, Brian, it's very simple. It is the study of the allocation of scarce resources. And you said it right there in your overview of we study how we allocate resources. Shefali, since that day, I've treated most problems, I want to say all, but obviously there's exceptions to every rule. I've treated most problems as a resource problem or an allocation problem rather than a resource problem. What does that mean for me as an entrepreneur? Well, anytime I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, well, gosh, I didn't get enough done this week. It's not a resource problem. It's not that I didn't have enough time. It's how I allocated that time. That allocation of resources, understanding that things are allocation problems rather than resource problems. Even when I started my first business with $100, I didn't have the resources. I had to allocate those very carefully. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this allocation because to me, we're really uncovering one of the things that people who haven't studied economics are missing when it comes to solving problems in their businesses, and I'm going to extrapolate it in their lives.
100%. You hit the nail on the head because that's so much of the work that I do with my clients and with others. It's allocation of resources. So it's interesting. If I think of when I ask a nonprofit or you ask like, I work with a lot of R&D folks across sectors and others. And I'm like, what's the number one thing you're missing? They're like, well, I want more resources, more money. Well, everybody does. You know, we live in a world of restrained resources, and as we ought to, we work in a fixed environment and a fixed earth. So really, it's not what can you do with more. It's really, you know, and in cases, yes, let's put that to the side though for a second. There are definitely places where like, hey, more is going to make this. This is what we can do. But let's look at a fixed constraints. Like this is the time. This is the time I have in a day. How do I optimize my allocation of that time? And I think as an entrepreneur, I'm consistently working with startups that are private or nonprofit startups. And that's when I think the leading issue that I've seen, and also the drive to success, is how well are you at allocating your resources, which really comes into how well do you know your strengths, how well do you understand your time, and really the ability to say no and put up boundaries and prioritize. So we started, I mentioned that kind of laziness, and I love how you said that, that quote. What it really is under that is it's prioritization. We're in a constant optimization cycle. And this is how I've run through my life. It's how I run my businesses. It's how I work with my clients. It's how I run my family and my household. It's really going through everything and saying, how do I better use what I have? And you get really creative. You get really innovative. You have to have hard discussions with yourselves and with others. Here's what we're going to put down for now. Here's what we can't do. And it really is important to have clear vision in that, because if you know what you're aiming for, and I have that in my Open Rivers mission statement, I have that in kind of what I want to deliver, I'm helping people achieve their mission. Well, then let's get really precise in how we best allocate our resources to make that happen.
Gosh, I love hearing you talk about these things. It's probably the first time here on the air that I'm like, this guest, Shefali, you 100% understand the way that my mind works, because even hearing you talk about in your line of work, how you work with clients, I know that for me and across all of my business portfolio, the one thing that I say these words to myself every Monday and typically every Sunday when I look at the week ahead is I say, all right, let's take inventory. And for me, that inventory process is first figuring out, okay, what are all the resources? What are all the things? What are all of my goals? Let's take inventory before we can start allocating our week, our resources, allocating all of those things. I'd love to hear your approach to this problem solving, because you're doing it for such a wide and interesting array of clients. What's that first step for you? Is it the taking inventory? Is it a set of questions that you ask your clients? I'd love to hear how you approach the problems.
Absolutely. And I love that you do that, because that kind of pause and check-in is actually, it's a practice. It's a muscle that I think all of us are developing all the time. I love when organizations do. It's actually, I'm going to take a slight digression and then answer your question, which is, I think when we're just doing, which can be a very societal push to, like, it's almost like widget production. We're told from the time we're young, you're only as good as how much you're moving, as opposed to the value for the movement. And we've kind of I think we have devalued and not maybe understood the value of the pause and step back. And so I love hearing that you're doing that on a consistent basis, because that's really powerful. And it's something I just personally went through, where I put my business, I just took my business through a massive reconfiguration, driven by a personal pause I did over the last 2 years that I realized was absolutely necessary. I looked at the last 20 years and said, what do I want my next 20 years to be? I created that pause, and that really helped. And that also got clearer in terms of, I applied the model that I would do with my clients to myself. So where do I start with my clients and with others when I meet them? Absolutely. Like, where are things? Just like listening. Listening is so incredibly important. I teach that in all my courses. It doesn't matter what you take with me. You're going to learn about active listening. I talk about my clients. It's something, again, that I'm constantly learning and getting better at. But listening, taking inventories, checking in. Where are we? What's going on? And then I do have questions that I have around my own kind of formula that I use. And it's kind of a fluid formula, but it really starts around, let's understand what you're going for, what's coming up, getting a layer from different people, bringing in lots of different information and different. So I love to start with, I say diagnostic, but it's just really open to what's coming in, where are we, with no judgment or assumptions, just very curious and where are we? And then it's amazing. It's been, like I said, I've done this for 20 years. I'm getting better and better and better. I feel like every time I do it, it comes, it just arises. I just finished a client who helps women right after they come out of prison. It's an incredible nonprofit here in Virginia, and they've been around 50 years. And it didn't take long before I kind of heard these things from the board, the executive director. And I said, wait, is this your problem? Because I keep hearing this. And they're like, yeah, it is. And so that's really the first step, is just being present and listening, and really holding folks with compassion for what they're going through. And it it hasn't failed. It always emerges. The clear path that everyone is seeing and rallying around.
To your credit, though, Shefali, when I hear you talk about that, where my head goes, just having looked at the body of your work and the business that you have, what I really appreciate about your business and your work and your approach, most importantly, is the fact that it is multidisciplinary. It's not that one thing. And I've always loved that quote of when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, because as someone, I've been in business since I was 19 years old. And so entrepreneurship is really all I know. And I found throughout that journey that if you ask a web designer, my business isn't growing, what should I do? They're going to tell you need a new website. If you ask a social media agency what you should do, they're going to say, well, you need social media. It seems to me, Shefali, that when you come to the table with these conversations, because you step into that holistic approach, which I want you to talk about that, because I feel like it's a buzzword that we throw around too frequently without defining and without actually practicing. It seems to me like you truly do have that holistic approach where you say, hey, I have this understanding of the way that I think, thanks to economics, thanks to statistics. I have this understanding of all these different case studies that I've seen and been a part of in all the clients I've worked with, that you're coming truly from scratch, which I think there's a lot of power to that, instead of saying, no, our solution here is going to be having a podcast or building a new website or whatever it is that we all do in the marketplace. Talk to me about that holistic approach and what it means to you and how you actually practice it.
Absolutely. So I'm going to highlight kind of 3 areas around that, just based on what we're talking about, that I think are really important from an entrepreneurial perspective. So one is kind of going back to we need to do. So the reason I start there, and not all my clients and everybody wants to, they want to go, right? They're like, you're here, let's get going, is it's really important to pause and make sure you're putting the cart behind the horse. What I've seen at so many organizations around the world is they're just running. Like you said, you talk to this person, this is the answer, this is a solution. And so often they're running after something and you realize that actually wasn't the solution, or that wasn't all of it. And that's where that pause and looking at the entirety of the picture and going, well, what is actually happening here? What are the questions? What do we need to do? So that's one major piece I've seen again and again, is so many organizations expend resources on just because they're just on path dependent, like this is what we heard, or we're just doing. Pausing is really tough for folks. I have had clients who just really get uncomfortable, why are you making us pause when we want to run? And I'm a huge fan of the slow down to run fast in everything in my life. And so massively important. The second piece around kind of that holistic piece is what you talk about, multidisciplinary. So recently I just wrote my first academic article in over 17 years, because I left academia for a while, and I got a chance to write this article about transdisciplinarity in environmental economics. And it's funny, I didn't know what that word meant. I was like, what's transdisciplinary? And it's the idea, it's actually beyond multidisciplinary. So you have so many disciplines, you don't even recognize where the lines are. You're really pulling from everything. And I realized that that's actually how I've lived, and that's allowed that holistic, this holistic perspective and this holistic method to really take hold. Because when you're not really wedded to any one way of thinking, it really opens up the field. And an example is, I often will have discussions with, I'm constantly meeting new people, everywhere I go, and I'll chat with people. Maybe I've been referred, and I have often said, I'm not the right person for you, but I will help you find that person. So it's something that, again, I run this business the way that I hold my own values, and how I run myself is I come in, I listen and go, well, what's the right fit? And maybe the right fit isn't Open Rivers at all. And so I've actually turned away a lot of folks, and I will actually, I'll just turn them away. I'm very lucky. I have an immense community of phenomenal entrepreneurs, and that's growing all the time. So I might refer them to coaches I know, refer them to other consultants, refer them to researchers. But for me, the biggest piece is I want to make sure that your goal and what you need has the right fit. And that's also part of that holistic mindset of meeting it. So even right now, I reduced all my paid clients last year, and I kind of turned my whole business model around, went very heavy on the pro bono nonprofit side while I'm rebuilding. I have 3 part-time folks who just came on last week, amazing, young people, but they're young people who are just phenomenal. And yes, a part of me is yes, I want to go out, I need to get my revenue stream going, I need the cash flow. But I'm making sure that I adhere to these principles. And I've already had some discussions with folks. So I've said, look, I know I can help you find the person you need, but here's why I don't think that's the right fit with me, but I'll work with you to get that. And then the third element of the holistic piece that's really important is, and it's tough because I use a lot of neuroscience and neurology when I do in consulting and my coaching work, just in my own research, is that whole hammer and nail thing is understandable. Whatever we're trained in, we are going to bring that forward because that's how our brain has worked. And this is where it matters to have others. And I think as a solo entrepreneur, this can get really tricky. So I have a group of like, I call them like my personal advisors. They're people who are like thought partners. I'll just pick up the phone and say, hey, can I just like bounce some ideas off of you? Across different fields. Like my entomology professor from like back at University of Minnesota, we're still in touch. I actually ended up being an advisor for him. Like we have, and it's been wonderful because sometimes I'll be like, this is something that needs like a totally different perspective. He's a wonderful Forest Service. He's served the Forest Service for like over, it's like 30, 40 years. He's been in the US government and just wonderful. But it's an example of just the range of folks. I have folks, ex-McKinsey colleagues. I have ex-Syngenta colleagues. I have folks who are in Australia and India. Just they offer that piece so that if ever you end up finding that you're overusing your hammer, which is absolutely normal again, because that's what we're trained, having those checks are incredibly important.
Yeah, Shefali, I feel like you just exposed one of your superpowers right there, and I want to resurface it because it's such an easy thing to look over. And you said that part of the holistic approach is pulling from everywhere. It's obviously something that you and I talked off air about, but I would argue that so much of society forces us into boxes. And so I remember my uncle, I come from an immigrant family, and my uncle in his first book, he wrote about, the very first chapter was called Unsortable. And he talked about when my family moved to the United States, he felt like he didn't fit into a box because he was only 9 when my mom's family moved to the US. And so he said, well, I'm not really Albanian. Like, I don't remember growing up in Albania, but people here don't treat me like I'm American. Because I am foreign and I have an accent and I wasn't fluent in English. And so he talks about that very notion of everyone wants to put us into a box. I think about it when we choose our major in college. Oh, you're in the business school, I'm in the art school. Like, we all are so clear about those boxes. Even with regards to content, I think part of the reason why you and I probably appreciate podcasting so much is we can have these long form conversations where if you're making TikTok videos, gosh, you only get to talk about one thing for 30 seconds, and it's got to be very to the point. Whereas so much of life is pulling from everywhere and exploring all these different ways. I would argue that going outside of those boxes that most people exist in, that gives you such a different perspective in solving problems. Whereas I see lawyers think that if they want to get ideas for their website, they have to look at other legal websites. Whereas I tell them, go look at what completely unrelated industries are doing and steal it. You'll be very innovative in your own industry. Shefali, talk to us about those links, because I would argue, and I'm sure you've seen this, most people don't see those links. They're not willing to go outside those boxes.
Absolutely. And I absolutely love that you can see that in your ancestry. And I think it's so important of like how it is. I would say that's how narratives are placed on us. And I think, and you're absolutely right, we have a society that's perpetually trying to tell us our own story. And so there's almost this act of, I would say that I spent my life kind of marching to the beat of my own drummer. And my father always said, he's like, you were like that from the time you came out. And I'm like, but my parents really helped to drive that, whether they accept that or not, because they were marching to the beat of their own drummer. Is that what we're really doing when we do that? Is we're saying, this is who I am, this is what I believe in. We establish our own narrative. And it's incredibly important for a host of reasons. So you read out at the beginning, you shared the 5 principles I use for founding Open Rivers. The reason I say diversity of perspective is exactly what you hit on. It's really easy to be pigeonholed and narrow. You say, I'm a law firm, or I work in conservation. You only look at others doing that. And it's really limiting because that's not going to be the end all be all. There's a massive world that's out there. And when we go and connect with others, we bring in fresh ideas. And it's something that I've valued and done. And folks have, it's not always comfortable. I definitely run into a lot of people like, well, give me the 90-second, elevator speech. And I would try. I tried for years. And what I realized then is, maybe I'm not going to try anymore. What I'm instead going to do is be myself and focus. And I'm going to attract the people who value that. And saying maybe it's not a 90-second tidbit or a 30-second tidbit, but I see the entirety of what you do. And the entirety of that is exactly going out, having those checks, the innovation. So I do a ton of work on research and innovation, both with clients with myself, with my own, even Open Rivers was meant to be like an experimental lab, essentially, when I founded it, where we could just try out anything. Anyone who's worked with me, any of my employees, they know there's a lot of freedom to try things. And to do that, you have to be pretty open to what else is happening. And actually, I have a funny story. I'm updating my website. It's about to go live. I'm really excited at a colleague from my coaching class who runs an awesome website business. But when he started, he said, "Can you look at competitors?" And I'm like, I don't know what a competitor is. I don't know what it is. I don't know what that space. But he was like, "What about others who do this?" And I'm like, it just felt so awkward to look at it. And so I flipped the script and said, "Why don't you show me the things that you've done that you're proud of?" He's helped several businesses. And he actually pulled out this website for, it's a tea restaurant and tea service out in California. And it was just beautiful. And it hit. And I'm like, that's it. That's the one. That's the feeling and the look. And he laughed. He said, "Okay, well, there we go." And it get exactly to your point. So I did find inspiration, but what I was looking for and what I needed was in tea service and around like bringing in kind of they're around mindset and mindfulness principles. So absolutely 100% to what you are hitting on is so critical. And I will say the entrepreneurs, whether they're private sector, whether nonprofit, that I've seen really, again, succeed and weather, I think what we're going to see is really the storm and some variability, have been those who are able to pivot and innovate and draw from many sources.
Yeah, I love that. I love that real life example of the tea company as well, because who would have thought? But that shows the broadening of your thinking and how open you were to possibilities. Shefali, I knew that time would fly by with two economics geeks talking on the air here today, but I do want to squeeze in a couple more questions because I also love talking to you, not only as the subject matter expert that you are, but also as one of us, as a fellow entrepreneur. I always remind listeners of that. And so part of what I really admire about what you do with Open Rivers, and obviously you've been in business for 8 years, I think we need to celebrate longevity so much more in entrepreneurship. All the magazine covers, they celebrate the overnight successes, but the real ones are the ones who have been here and will be here for a long time. And so with that in mind, I know, since I started my first business when I was 19, that no business is linear. There are so many twists and turns. You've talked about reinventing and reimagining your business, even here in our conversation today. Talk to us about those open possibilities. Too many people convince themselves of, this is the business, this is what I'm going to do for the next 10 years, but Shefali, you and I have been in the game long enough to know that there's no predicting what we're going to do for the next 10 years. I want to hear from you about that open-mindedness of all the twists and turns and the reinventions of your own business.
Absolutely. And this is the third version of Open Rivers. So it started back in 2017 when folks from McKinsey and University of Minnesota reached out to me and they were like, "Are you available?" And I said, "I could be available as a consultant." They said, "Sure, why not?" And that was my first project that became Embold and getting to work with awesome people in Minnesota. I then went to serve Soil Health Partners. So something that I've done, and I still believe in this model, is stepping away into different roles. So I actually was executive director with the National Corn Growers, came back to my business. I stepped away again to serve in the US government and then came back to my business. And each one gave that, again, that value of the check-in and the pause to step back, because in 8 years, the world has changed phenomenally. I just think I work heavily in agriculture, environment. I work with communities and data. Through COVID, through all the changes, through our supply chain issues, there's just this massive change in how we interact with data, our understanding of everything from AI and new tech. So you're constantly having to step back and go, where do I contribute and do I have value? What is my mission and how does that look today? Personally, again, so I'm a strategy consultant, and so I practice what I preach. I make sure every year I step back and do a massive annual basically scan and say, what am I still aiming for? What aligns with that? What's going to allow that to happen? And then every now and then, like I just did last year, starting in 23 to last year, I do like a massive pivot that might be necessary to say, is this still relevant? Do I need to make really massive structural changes? And I think when you I always say, kind of hold that a bit lightly. I never let go of my mission. My mission's been really solid and clear to me from day one, but you kind of hold how you do it a bit lightly. You're able to see that space to know, okay, this is time for me to pivot. This is time for me to shift. I wanted to do a business expansion. And like I said, people thought I was crazy. I know my family, friends were like, "Wow, she's going from," I had a 90% drop in my revenue consciously because of I shifting who I was working with and what my focus was. But I do believe that that risk is paying off. I'm in a year of building right now. I'm very excited. This is amazing timing for this podcast. But like part of it is completely driven by the idea that it's absolutely nonlinear and that we're going to keep moving. And I saw where I'm working more in mental health and embedding things across the board with scientists. I'm working more in environment. I want to go back to, I'm teaching on supply chain and wanting to return to my supply chain roots because I love working on supply chains and I love working with private companies. Just being able to hold that breath, that came from looking at it from a nonlinear perspective.
Yes, I love that. Shefali, you remind me of something that I learned a long time ago, and I think it's such an important life and business lesson, which is to not be married to certain things. We may be married to our whys, and that's really good that we always remember that, but we don't have to be married to the hows or to the whats, and I think that's so important to give ourselves that flexibility and those open doors. So, Shefali, it's been so much fun hearing all of these insights. I will say you clearly love broad questions, and here at the end of every episode, I love asking this super broad question because I like seeing which direction guests take it in, and that is, what's your one best piece of advice? Knowing that we're being listened to by both entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs at all different stages of their own growth journeys, what's that one piece of advice that you want to leave them with today?
Absolutely. The one piece of advice is a thing that I think that I've come to in the last couple of years is that everything comes from like here. Like we can't do everything, or we can't hit our potential if like we're not okay. And so my biggest piece is that no matter what happens, always make sure that like you are okay, that you're taking care of yourself, that you're addressing things that are coming up, you're making sure your foundation is okay, you're nurtured and well. Self-care has come up as a word, and there's a lot of, I think, misunderstanding what it really is. At the heart of it is, can you hold compassion to yourself and take care of yourself? And from that, we can do magic, but it really is that foundation has to always be there to make sure we're holistically, mentally, emotionally, physically well. And then, and as an entrepreneur, as anyone, we can take care of others, we can build businesses, we can achieve our mission. We're in it for the long game.
Yes, such important advice for every single one of us as entrepreneurs. A lot of us are action takers, we're doers, we like to move fast, but holy cow, that advice is advice that if we skip it over, we're always going to come back to that advice. It is so important. So I'm so grateful for you sharing that with our audience today, Shefali. On that note, I am personally excited to see your new website. Obviously, there's a little bit of lag time before this episode airs, so it may be live, listeners. Shefali's going to drop that link on us in just a second, but I'm personally excited to see. I so appreciate the way that you articulate your work, the way that you articulate your approach, and I know that listeners will be keen to check all of that out as well. So drop those links on us. Where should listeners go from here?
Absolutely. So my full name is Open Rivers Consulting Associates, and you can find our website is open-rivers.com. We also had a podcast back in COVID. I interviewed cool people I work with. Those are 3 seasons. They're called Open Rivers Navigators. That's on Apple. And then I'm also on LinkedIn. We're going to have our blog coming back. There's a lot of work out there that we're putting out through the website and through different channels. And I'm also on Instagram. So please connect. And I'm always looking for cool ideas, collaborators. Just say hi. I love I love connecting with folks and love this chance to do this to be on this podcast, Brian, and chat with you.
Yes, and listeners, you already know the drill. We're making it as easy as possible for you to find all of those links down below in the show notes, no matter where it is that you're tuning into today's episode. I love the fact Shefali is a fellow podcaster, so she called it out for all of you listeners. Don't be shy. Reach out. You want to have amazing entrepreneurs in your network, people that you can turn to, whether it's for solutions or even just you've heard about how Shefali talked about how important her network is to her success and the success of everybody else that she interacts with. So most people are shy. When they hear these open invites on podcast episodes, they don't take action. Be one of the few that does. So Shefali, I'm so grateful for the way that you show up. On behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Brian, and love this platform. Love what you've done for entrepreneurs across the board, and thanks for this opportunity.